Welcome to IAB Canada's podcast, The Business of Digital.
Within hours.
Thanks for tuning in, and today we get the distinct pleasure of having a word with Saad Uddin, the CEO and founder of Native Touch here in Toronto. And good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Sonia.
Oh, well, thank you for having me in your lovely office. So, and also, it was really nice to have you at the State of the Nation this year, our Across Canada excursion, where we talked to all the different markets about what's emerging and what's happening. And I know that we don't get around to those markets enough, and it's really nice to have those great deep conversations with people across Canada. And one of the conversations that definitely we've been having, I guess, for upwards of 2 years now is around AI. And last year there was certainly a feeling that AI was a lot more threatening to the entire ecosystem, and people were asking a lot of really interesting questions around how this will impact online advertising. And I wonder if maybe we can explore a little bit of that today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the digital advertising space, along with the financial industry, have been familiar with machine learning and AI for many years, specifically because we have large data sets, and being able to process large, good data sets to come up with conclusions in more of an automated fashion is very possible in our industries. As we see everyone talking about AI today, one of the big challenges that the other industries are facing is finding good data to work off of. And I think we saw it earlier on with some AI-driven ad networks and ad platforms and so on. And one of the things that we learned as an industry was that a lot of it was a lot more automation than actual AI.
Ah, interesting. So the intelligence wasn't really following along.
Yeah, or it was a little bit too black box to really understand where the AI came in. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that a lot of people, whether in our industry or other industries currently exploring AI, misunderstand is it's not just the fact of having AI expertise, it's also what the core to having AI is having good data, right? So it's not just that the big firms like a Google and a Facebook have AI to their disposal or AI engineers and so on, algorithms and so on, is they have really, really good user data. Mm-hmm. And putting AI on garbage data is going to give you even more garbage data. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that in many scenarios, even if you look at classically how audience building has occurred. You take a few signals about a user and then you put some machine learning models on top of those signals, and then all of a sudden you have massive scale. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that the industry has been so focused on scale, which makes sense because you need to have a scalable solution to reach customers, has really decreased the value of a lot of these audiences that have been built over the years using machine learning and AI techniques.
Okay, well, so when you think about AI and you think about, compare it to, because I know you've been in the industry for quite a while. When online advertising first started, really, the big promise of data was huge, and everybody wanted to do some of that, right? Email was launched, and everybody wanted to get on board with email. Search, it was launched, everybody wanted to get on board with search. Now, the term AI is being thrown around so much, and the big advertisers want to get on board with that. So how do they get on board with that? So think about the brands or the agencies that you're working with. What are some of the first steps, or what are the some of the considerations that the brands have to take into consideration, like to get into the AI game?
Sure, I think that one of the most important things that I mentioned to our clients is the focus today should be on the data asset. Mm-hmm. Because once again, without good quality, strong, privacy compliant and secure data, it doesn't matter how advanced you are with AI or what you want to do. If you don't have good data, and a lot of us don't in the market, then you have nothing to work with when it comes to AI. And I'm speaking specifically within the context of advertising and marketing. If you're looking at audience building and analytics and so on, you really need good data to start with.
And that data comes from the biggest providers, though, or where, or from partners, or where? Where does that data reside?
I think all of the above. And data is so widely available today, and to build a good data asset, you need data expertise in-house. Because everyone is going to say, my data is the best, my data is of the highest quality, and so on. But then unless you have expertise to comb through it internally, or a trusted partner to do that for you, then there's no way of knowing how good quality that data is. So, for example, one of the data types that we've been familiar with for a number of years, because we're a mobile ad tech company, is location data.
Right.
Location data is today pretty much table stakes at a high level. It's widely available, but there's a lot of very poor quality data out there, because there isn't just one way of collecting location data. When a user downloads an application that asks for the user's location to be tracked in the background, that is the highest quality of data that can be collected, but it's not scalable. So to add scale to it, what a lot of data providers may do is bring on other types of location signals, whether it's coming from Wi-Fi networks, whether it is coming from IP address and turning that into a user's latitude, longitude. So there are a lot of different ways of determining a user's location trajectory. And there isn't one that's necessarily a lot worse than the other. It's just understanding that is something that the market just isn't aware of.
Right.
And everyone, as an industry, we tend to look at potentially all location data at the same level, whereas it's not.
Isn't that the same with like any kind of first party, second party, third party data setup that's currently existing in the supply chain? It's kind of broken. It's coming from different data sets. Different definitions around it, right? So we talk a lot about when you're dealing with third parties, really getting an understanding around their taxonomy. So and their intent qualifiers, right? So what does it mean to be a car intender if you've got 3 different suppliers and each one of them have their own definition? And one is, operating on a window of, well, this one person, looked at 3 sites, but that was 4 months ago, versus, another probably more stable vendor who is providing leads from yesterday or last week, and a sort of a more intense lead. So how do you make up for that? How do you operate in that kind of a world when there's so many inconsistencies and you really don't know how to navigate that? Is that a partnership situation? Are there people who can actually navigate through that?
Yeah, so again, it comes down to expertise in data and being able to see the data in raw form, whether it's a snippet of it, whether it's the entire data set. The advantage to first party and second party data is the fact that, in first party, you own the data. You're dropping the tags, you're collecting it through an SDK and so on, so you have full control and knowledge of that to some degree. Second party data, you're transacting with someone who's in a first party data situation and that they're collecting their own data. Third party data is where a lot of the ambiguity comes in, because I may use a specific signal to build out a specific audience, but then how am I turning that into a lookalike audience and so on?
Right.
So that's where being on the other side of it, let's say a brand or an advertiser, being able to ask those specific questions and understand those data methodologies, whether it's for a car intender or a pregnant mother and so on, is extremely important.
Right.
And if you look at some of the ease of accessing some of these audience segments, a lot of that type of conversation rarely occurs.
Right.
I think that the other part of, if you look at the data conversation and the concerns around how data at the user level may be very limited in Canada, and it's definitely headed in that direction. What's exciting about what's happening with the data space is that there's a lot of data that's available, that's accessible, that's not necessarily speaking to a specific user, but maybe speaking to a specific location, a specific geography, or a specific time of day, and so on. And that's what becomes really interesting, even if you look at machine learning models to put on top of other data sources. So one of the classic ones that we use heavily in mobile that we've been using for years is weather. Right? It's snowing today, so I need to get new winter tires. It's raining, I need to get new windshield wipers. So that's an easy one. And that's one we've been talking about for many years. A lot of advertisers have used it. But then there's other data. So for example, looking at flight patterns, right? When are flights taking off from Trudeau or Pearson airports? What type of an impact does that have on traffic at those specific airports? Looking at other types of trends of different festivals that may be going around in Toronto and wanting to reach specifically those users and at those specific times. So pulling in that type of data via APIs into whether it's targeting or creative becomes really exciting and interesting as well. I think that's a major opportunity that's very overlooked when it comes to data in general, because we're very hyper-focused on just user level and getting as much as we know about that specific user.
That's interesting. So knowing when to collect it, but also knowing when to apply it.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to the geofencing versus the geodata side of the story. But well, that's neat, and it sounds to me like that could, if you're doing it properly, and if you've got the skills in house or through partnerships, that it could be a good differentiator, because another piece of the conversation around AI, and in the greater picture, I think as we become more automated, and this game becomes more automated, and by game I mean digital marketing and advertising. What does differentiation look like? And looking at 2018 and beyond, we've got people that are, or organizations that are writing content for us through machine learning. We've got headlines that are being optimized through artificial intelligence. Where is the differentiator if everybody has access to it? I don't know if you've seen the latest superhero, or the Incredibles movie.
I haven't yet.
Okay,
It's
well,
on my list.
in the original, famous line from the Incredibles movie is, when everyone's super, nobody is, right? And so this idea of giving everybody these tools and the power to do all of this sort of stuff, what does the future look like then? If, does it look vanilla and generic?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question when it comes to differentiation. No matter where you are in the food chain, everyone does have access to the same or similar tools. So how do you differentiate on top of that? That's something that we obviously think about. We have our clients differentiate as well. And I think for the longest time, I guess for the last few years, a lot of firms have realized that they need to build their own data asset. And that is where they were actually losing. And that scares me to some degree, because I've heard in certain conversations that, as an advertiser, we've implemented a DMP, so we're all set, right? And the challenge with that is that a DMP across your own properties only tells you about your consumers in your environment. What else do you know about them, and so on. And I think that when it comes to differentiation, data is often used to differentiate no matter where you are, once again, within the food chain. But the service layer or expertise on top of that is extremely important. As much as that doesn't sound like the next shiny tool, that is what's extremely important. So if you look at a lot of the challenger brands that are coming up,
right,
what they've done is they've used the existing platforms and tools that are out there, but they really stick to the fundamentals of digital advertising. So a good example is I was speaking with the VP of marketing at a leading brand retailer in Canada, and I asked them, they've got storefronts, they have an online website, and he spent a lot on digital advertising. And I said, you're coming from initially just looking at digital advertising and tying digital ad spend to some sort of online transaction, but how do you track it into a location?
Right.
How do you track that transaction? How do you track that ad spend into results on site? And what he was telling me is that he really just looks at ROAS, right? So return on ad spend is extremely important to him. And depending on which environment he's using, whether it's a social network, whether it's a search, or whether it's a video platform, he'll have specific goals for each one, realizing that not all digital spend is only going to be driving digital actions. And that's one of the things that we sometimes lose track of, especially.
You mean the holistic picture, so the offline, or the resonance, I guess, of the brand that's coming off of digital in total. Well, that's cool.
And I think where the differentiation opportunity, going back to your question actually, the differentiation opportunity is in looking at what can be done outside of some of the easy button opportunities that we have, and going back to some of the tools that are available to us. because everyone is doing that, right?
You mean the do-it-yourself sort of platforms, like what we all have access to with a credit card?
Exactly. You
All
plug in a credit card,
Yeah.
you hire a designer, and then you can go live with an ad campaign. The opportunity really is in some of the other environments where your potential consumers may be. How do you find them? What type of other unique data sets can you use to find those consumers, to reach them, and so on? So that's just purely from a targeting, an advertising perspective. But then if you look at the creative component, this is something that, I mean, we're in mobile, we've been preaching mobile for 7 years now, and still till this day we see a lot of 728 by 90 banners resized to the 320 by 50. That's just not going to work. It hasn't worked. And this is just a huge opportunity.
It's worked, but just not for, for that. For
Exactly.
anything.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right?
that you want, yeah.
Like you run a mobile campaign, or you reach a consumer on their mobile device, but it's a terrible user experience.
Right.
And still till this day I see advertiser websites where a mobile ad will drive to a desktop website. So I think as non-attractive that sounds, to really focus on the fundamentals, those are still a lot of voids that I personally see when it comes to mobile advertising that are being left behind because there's this focus on the next shiny thing. And a good example is the conversation around AI. How do I get involved in AI? How do I get involved in blockchain?
Right.
Blockchain is a great example because you have a lot of investment going there. You have, all sorts of people who have no idea where they're putting their money into cryptocurrencies. And it's because everyone's looking for that big opportunity. Whereas really the fundamentals of digital advertising are there's still a lot of opportunity there.
Classic. So this is a classic issue where people are still chasing after the shiny object, where when they have, or it's kind of like eating dessert without having had your dinner, your peas and your carrots. Yeah, which is, it's true. And this is, if I had a nickel on the planning side for every time a client was saying, oh no, please don't put any mobile ads there because we haven't really optimized our mobile site yet. We're 21 years in, right? I mean, I'm not sure what people are waiting for in terms of, proving cases or making sure that the investment is actually worth it. And it's become so much easier now to really update things and to play in digital legitimately. There's a low cost to entry in most cases, and there just doesn't seem to be any excuse for people not to actually cover their bases off. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
And that's where the opportunity is. So for people who see that deficiency, is to go in and take advantage of where nobody else is looking. And where nobody else is looking is exactly like the fundamentals of a mobile experience.
Well, have you heard of, I'm sure you have, everybody has, but Net Promoter Score and the SAT metrics system where organizations would sort of do scoring. They would run a diagnostic on their entire organizations and then figure out where in the chain there needed to be some sort of an adjustment made, right? Or where they needed to either reinforce, invest, or cut. It would be interesting to see how many people would run almost like a diagnostic on their entire digital presence before moving forward with a new campaign, right? Or with a new a new year, even a new fiscal year, without actually taking into consideration what are some of the things that are broken, what are some of the leaky pipes, and what are some of the assets that we have that we're not actually using, like what you described, the first-party data, and are we using it properly? And what kind of partnerships, what can we do with this data, right? Because it's not always just about your own advertising, it's also working with your partners, your retailers, or whoever it is, if you're a CPG. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, that can be found probably when you're doing that kind of a navel-gazing exercise. That's kind of cool. What about creative? Is that a white space still, or do you think that we've done everything that we could do creatively?
I think that is definitely an area that when we talk about AI threatening multiple industries and completely destroying them, I believe that creative is a difficult area to disrupt with AI. I think that there are a lot of human elements that are important there. And to answer your question about where we are with creative, I still think that in a lot of scenarios it's just a very poor experience. One is because chasing the omni-channel route, which is extremely important, and looking for the user as opposed to user in on a specific device is great, but what it does is it blinds us from all the different user experiences that are happening with your brand. So by pushing a specific banner that's been resized in many which ways to a whole bunch of users, whether they're on their TV, on their desktop, or on their mobile phone, it really neglects the fact that those are all three very extremely different contexts. So if I see an ad for a financial institution when I'm on the bus, I'm not only going to fill out that form because I'm on my mobile device, but I'm on the bus. I'm waiting for someone or talking to someone. So, but that's still an extremely important moment for a brand to reach me. Versus when I'm on my desktop.
Right.
And bringing that into targeting as well as creative is extremely important. And with all the data that we have coming from the mobile device itself, there is opportunity to bring that in to inform your creative. So for example, someone who has the latest high-end smartphone versus the entry-level smartphone speaks to a little bit about their earnings, how much disposable income they have, and being able to market just even at that, based on that very basic signal, is a very intelligent way of augmenting creative. And you don't need first-party data or third-party data or anything like that. You just need an intelligent approach of looking at what the user experience is.
So it's all about strategy.
Yeah, and that's the exciting part. You were asking about differentiation. How do we add value today? Is looking for those types of opportunities. The other part of it, Sonia, you mentioned that a lot of brands have difficulty doing a full assessment of what does my experience look like on an Android versus an Apple Watch versus all these different devices. It's hard because before you would have, a bank would have a branch and that's where your user experience was, or the phone. Now you have millions of consumers across Canada who can interact with you at your point of sale, at your actual locations. They can interact with you on their device, they can call you, and there's so many different ways, and it's so hard to reel that in. And at the same time, if you're a CPG company, for example, all of a sudden your products are also available on Amazon. And what happens when it comes to search engine optimization-like strategies for some of these voice-enabled devices? Like, you need to start thinking about that. Right? And all of those, the user experience is extremely fragmented, and it's going to become more and more fragmented because no one user has the same type of experience as the other with your brand.
That's fascinating. The SEO question around AI and audio is really interesting because when Amazon, I'm not going to say when Amazon was new, but when people were just starting to figure out how to leverage Amazon properly, like the retailers, they started to realize, oh my goodness, we need a whole strategy just to optimize and merchandise within the channel. And there's all sorts of tools that exist within this channel that we haven't really leveraged. And so when you think about those user experiences and the tentacles that are now available, as you said, with all of the different channels and all of the different models of phones, those tentacles run deep. And for you to have like several blind spots on how your brand is being communicated across those channels is pretty significant, right? If you don't know what's happening from a voice standpoint about your product, it's one thing to read an SEO or a listing and sort of make heads or tails of it if it's not exactly the way the brand would have liked it to be. But to hear something that you don't want your brand to be aligned with, or to have some sort of an audio attachment to your brand that isn't really aligned with how you envision your brand, that's a whole other game. And I wonder how deep audio will go in terms of creative optimization, and how many opportunities will exist to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions around how these devices are going to be monetized, the content, how that's going to be monetized. I think with the Alexa device, I think it's fairly clear as to what the entry point is for Amazon, selling more products. That's where they make money. But then what's going to happen with Google, they have a partnership with Walmart, for example. And now your brand needs to be present in those places. Otherwise, others are taking that money. And I think that's what's exciting, even just from an entrepreneur's perspective, is that there are so many different avenues to launch a business today. there are people making a lot of money on the Amazon platform, right? Or if you look at an Uber or a Lyft, like people are finding different ways to make money. There are periods of just opportunity where people are just milking some of these systems and then it stabilizes. But there are people definitely making money there, and if your brand's not present there, someone else is definitely taking that sale.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I'm sure we could talk for another hour about this stuff, or more. But maybe we'll leave it to our next event, and we should definitely unpack this a little bit more deeply. So I want to thank you so much, Saad, for your thoughts today, and let's continue this discussion. And maybe this will be some fodder for some of the committees and councils. Some of the materials that we put together, because oftentimes, and as I mentioned, the IAB is really quite concerned about the fact that we've been on defense for the past few years, just trying to stabilize the transparency issues, viewability, fraud, all of those different things, and now of course with the GDPR staring at us from across the ocean, we've got a lot on our plate, and sometimes we lose sight of what's so exciting about this channel. And we also lose sight of the basics, the beautiful basics of just online advertising and what's available to us. So I really appreciate your thoughts on this, and look forward to further discussion.
Likewise, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on IAB Canada's podcast, The Business of Digital.